You wake up to the roar of 50,000 people, but it doesn't sound like excitement. It sounds like hunger. Your name is Marcus Reed, and just days ago, you were a man with a life, a past, people who knew you. Now you're standing alone on hot sand, staring at a gate that's about to open, knowing that whatever comes through it was chosen to end you. Your hands are shaking, your body isn't ready, and the people watching you don't want you to survive. They want a show. And in 10 seconds, you're going to understand something most men here realize too late, that dying quickly would actually be the better outcome. The gate begins to rise, slowly enough to make every second stretch longer than it should, and in that moment your mind does something strange. It doesn't think about fighting. It doesn't think about strategy. It thinks about everything you've lost. The quiet moments. The people who would never even know how you ended up here. And then the light breaks through, blinding at first, and whatever stands on the other side steps forward. This is the moment where everything changes, where the idea of survival stops being a plan and becomes a question you may not get to answer. And before we go any further, understand this, because it will follow you through every second of this story. The fight you're about to face is only the beginning. Marcus Reed wasn't supposed to be here. That's what he keeps telling himself as the noise of the crowd presses in from every direction, as if the entire world has closed in around him. Months earlier, he had been somewhere else entirely, living a life that felt stable, predictable, something he could control. But control is an illusion that disappears the moment someone stronger decides to take it from you. Marcus learned that the hard way when he was captured, stripped of everything that defined him, and turned into something else entirely. Not a soldier, not even a prisoner, something closer to property, something that could be bought, trained, and eventually destroyed for the sake of entertainment. The first time Marcus saw the arena from the outside, it didn't feel real. The structure rose above the city like something built to remind you how small you are, how little you matter once you step into its shadow. He didn't know the numbers then, didn't know how many people it could hold or how many had already died inside it. But he didn't need to. You can feel a place like that without understanding it. You can sense what it was built for. And standing there in chains, surrounded by others who had been taken just like him, Marcus understood something without anyone having to say it out loud. This place didn't exist for survival. It existed for endings. The man who bought Marcus didn't see fear when he looked at him. He saw value, strength in his frame, enough to justify the cost, enough to believe he could last longer than most. That man was a Lanista, the owner of a Gladiator school, and to him, Marcus was an investment. Not a person with a past or a future, just something that could generate attention, maybe even profit, if it survived long enough. And survival, in this world, didn't mean escaping. It meant lasting just long enough to be useful. Life inside the training grounds stripped away whatever Marcus had left of his old identity. Days were structured around discipline, repetition, and exhaustion. You woke when they told you, ate what they gave you, trained until your body stopped responding the way it should. The weapons you practiced with were heavier than the ones you'd eventually carry into the arena, designed to push your muscles past their limits so that when the real moment came, everything felt slightly easier. But nothing about it was easy. Not the weight, not the pace, and certainly not the understanding that every skill you learned was meant for one purpose: to keep you alive just long enough to entertain a crowd that expected you to die eventually. Marcus noticed something early on that no one explained to him directly. Some fighters were treated differently, given better equipment, more attention, more time to recover. Others were pushed harder, faster, as if their purpose was to burn out quickly. It didn't take long to realize that not everyone was meant to succeed. Some were being prepared to win. Others were being prepared to lose in a way that looked convincing. And the most dangerous part was not knowing which one you were. Nights were the hardest. Not because of the physical pain, though that never really went away, but because that's when the noise stopped and the thoughts came back. Marcus would lie there, staring into the darkness, listening to the breathing of the men around him, each one trapped in their own version of the same reality. Some whispered to themselves. Some stayed completely silent. And every now and then, someone would be taken away before morning. No explanation, no return, just gone. And no one asked questions, because everyone already knew the answer. Time moves differently when you're waiting for something you can't escape. Days blend together until the moment finally comes, until your name is called, and everything you've been avoiding becomes real. For Marcus, that moment arrived sooner than he expected. There was no ceremony, no build-up, just a simple order that changed everything. He was being sent to the arena. The hours leading up to that moment felt unreal, like he was watching himself from a distance, going through the motions without fully processing what they meant. He was given food, better than usual, enough to restore some energy, but not enough to make him feel strong. Around him, other men were doing the same thing, eating, sitting, thinking in silence. Some tried to act normal, to talk about anything that wasn't what was coming. Others didn't bother. They just sat there, staring ahead, already somewhere else in their minds. Marcus tried to focus on what he could control. His breathing, the way he held himself, the movements he had practiced over and over again. But there's a difference between training and reality, and deep down, he knew it. Training doesn't prepare you for the weight of knowing that one mistake could end everything. Training doesn't prepare you for the sound of thousands of people waiting to see you fail. When they led him beneath the arena, into the network of tunnels that ran underneath the sand, the air changed. It felt heavier, harder to breathe, filled with sounds that didn't belong in any normal place. Animals shifting in cages, metal scraping against stone, voices echoing from directions you couldn't see. Marcus kept moving because he had to, because stopping wasn't an option, but every step felt like it was taking him further away from anything familiar. He could hear the crowd above him, faint at first, then louder as he got closer to the surface. It wasn't just noise. It was energy, expectation, something that fed off what was about to happen. And as he stood there, waiting for his turn, Marcus realized something that changed the way he saw everything. This wasn't just about fighting. It was about performance, about giving the crowd exactly what they came for, whether that meant victory or defeat. When the gate finally opened and Marcus stepped into the light, everything else disappeared. The tunnel, the training, the waiting, all of it faded into the background as he faced the reality in front of him. His opponent stood across the sand, calm in a way that Marcus couldn't match, moving with a confidence that only comes from experience. This was someone who had been here before, someone who understood how this worked in a way Marcus didn't. The first movement came quickly, faster than Marcus expected, and he barely reacted in time. Steel met steel, the sound sharp and immediate, pulling him fully into the moment whether he was ready or not. There was no time to think, no space to hesitate, only the instinct to survive and the pressure of knowing that every movement was being watched, judged, reacted to. The crowd's response followed every exchange, rising and falling with the rhythm of the fight, turning each moment into something bigger than it should have been. Marcus could feel it affecting him, pushing him to move faster, to take risks he might not have taken otherwise. And that's when he understood one of the most dangerous parts of the arena. It didn't just test your body, it manipulated your mind. As the fight continued, Marcus started to find a rhythm, small adjustments that kept him in the fight longer than anyone might have expected. It wasn't clean, it wasn't controlled, but it was enough. Enough to keep going, enough to create opportunities, enough to make the outcome uncertain. And uncertainty is what keeps a crowd engaged. At some point, the balance shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough for Marcus to notice. His opponent slowed, just slightly, just enough to create an opening. And in that moment, Marcus acted without hesitation. The strike landed, not perfectly, but effectively, and suddenly the roles were reversed. Now it was Marcus standing over someone else, feeling the weight of a decision that wasn't really his to make. The crowd reacted immediately, their voices rising into something louder, more intense, demanding an outcome. Marcus looked toward them, toward the people who had the power to decide what happened next, and realized how little control he actually had. He had survived the fight, but survival didn't mean safety. It didn't mean rest. It didn't even mean relief. Because as soon as one fight ended, the next one was already being prepared. And the longer you lasted, the more valuable you became, not as a person, but as a source of entertainment. Marcus was taken back beneath the arena, his body aching, his energy drained, and yet there was no sense of completion. No moment where he could say it was over. Because it wasn't. It was never over. Not here. Hours passed, though it was hard to tell how many. Time lost its meaning in a place where everything revolved around cycles of violence and recovery that never fully completed. Marcus tried to rest, tried to gather whatever strength he had left, But the reality was impossible to ignore. He had already given more than his body could comfortably handle, and there was still more expected of him. And then came the next realization. The fights weren't the only danger. The injuries he carried, the exhaustion, the constant strain on his body, all of it added up in ways that couldn't be fixed overnight. Even if he avoided another fight, even if he managed to stay alive through skill or luck, his body was still breaking down. Slowly, steadily, in ways that guaranteed this wouldn't last. When he was called again, Marcus felt it immediately. The difference. The fatigue that slowed his reactions. The weight that made every movement harder than it should have been. And this time, the situation was different. The opponent wasn't just another fighter. It was something else entirely. The gate opened, and what stepped through wasn't human. The reaction from the crowd changed instantly, shifting into something sharper, more exciting. This was what they had been waiting for. Something unpredictable. Something dangerous in a way that couldn't be controlled. Marcus stood his ground because he had no other choice. But inside, everything was telling him the same thing. This was where it ended. Not because he lacked the will to keep going, but because the situation itself was designed to overwhelm him. And that's what the Colosseum did better than anything else. It created scenarios where survival wasn't just difficult. It was unlikely. What happened next wasn't clean or controlled or anything that resembled a fair fight. It was chaos, movement driven by instinct, decisions made in fractions of a second with consequences that couldn't be undone. Marcus fought the only way he could, not to win, but to last, to buy time, to push the inevitable just a little further away. And for a moment, it worked. Just enough to create the illusion that he might make it through. But illusions don't last long in a place like this. Eventually, something gives. A misstep, a delay, a moment where the body doesn't respond the way it should. Marcus felt it before he fully understood it. The shift, the loss of control. And in that instant, everything he had been holding together started to fall apart. The crowd reacted, louder than ever, feeding off the moment, pushing it toward its conclusion. And as Marcus hit the ground, the same realization from the beginning returned, clearer now, impossible to ignore. This was never about whether he could survive. It was about how long it would take before he couldn't anymore. What happens after that is something most people never think about. The fight ends, but the process continues. There are steps, procedures, things put in place to make sure nothing is left uncertain. Because in a place built around control, even death has to be confirmed. Marcus's story ends the way most stories here do. Not with a moment of glory or recognition, but with a system that moves forward without hesitation, preparing for the next fight, the next name, the next person who will step onto the sand believing they might be different. And that's why you wouldn't last 24 hours in the Colosseum. Not because you lack strength or courage, but because the entire structure was designed to make sure that eventually everyone breaks. So the question isn't whether you could survive. The question is how long it would take before the arena decided you had stayed long enough.